At a time when the fight against the climate change is losing prominence due to the war in Ukraine, the UN organized in Lisbon the Ocean Conference. We have with us the Secretary General António Guterres, and I ask you the first question is how can we put again climate change and the fight against the climate change on top of the international agenda?
Well, by doing everything possible to make it happen and by raising the issue as much as possible in all fronts. And if you look at the war in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine demonstrates how important it would have been if in the last decades we had invested massively in renewable energy. If that had happened, we would not be today at the mercy of the fossil fuel industry with prices that are extremely high, as you know, and undermining the quality of life of people and undermining the situation of many developing countries. So if the war in Ukraine demonstrates something, is that we need to accelerate the green transition, which means we need to fight climate change much more effectively.
But we are seeing world leaders reinvesting in fossil energy. How can we convince them to?
That is a suicide, and I hope that people will understand that suicide is not exactly the best way to face the future.
It's hard to convince normal people facing problems with food, with energy, that they need to prioritize climate change and the fight against the climate change. How can you do that?
Well, first of all, we need to try to solve the problem, namely at food security. That's why we are so involved in trying to create the conditions to allow for both the Ukrainian food products and the Russian food and fertilizer products to have access to the global markets, exactly to improve the situation and to allow prices to come down. And I believe there are also other initiatives in relation to the prices of energy. But obviously, in this situation, especially with fossil fuels so expensive, it's a good reason to use it as little as possible. So it's in the interest of everybody. It's in the interest of everybody to go on determined in fighting climate change, because that is the only way to avoid in future situations like these, this dramatic dependency on the instability of the fossil fuel markets.
And we are seeing that also the seas and the oceans are being used as a weapon. The access to the sea, the Black Sea, is being used as a weapon. And we are seeing, and we saw some young people here with some messages about the mines in the ocean. How can we fight that?
Now, first of all, in relation to the access from the Ukrainian ports, that is exactly what the UN plan that was presented to the Russians, the Ukrainians, with the support of Turkey, aims at, and we hope that it will be possible soon to have in Istanbul a meeting of the four in order to based on the different consultations that have been made, namely at bilateral level by the military of these three countries, we hope that it will be possible to come to an agreement allowing for the export of the Ukrainian grains, and at the same time that the international countries facilitate the exports of Russian food and fertilizers, since it is true that there are no sanctions applied to food and fertilizers. But there are complexities in shipping, in insurance, in payments that need to be addressed, and that is why we have been in close contact with the European Union, with the United States and with Russia, to be able also to have a package deal involving the access of both Ukrainian and Russia food and fertilizer products to the global markets.
Russia is an important player on this fight. It's possible to make them get back on the stage to help the world fighting the climate change?
Well, I mean, Russia is present here in the Oceans Conference, and I believe that the fight against climate change is a vital interest of all humanity. So all countries need to assume it as their priority.
Here in this event with young people, you apologize because your generation contributes too much for this situation.
No, my generation is responsible for the fact that we are at war with nature, that we have the climate change situation not under control. We should be reducing emissions this decade dramatically, and the forecasts based on the present commitments by member states all over the world would still represent in 2030 an increase of emissions, which is suicidal, totally unacceptable. And in relation to the oceans, we are still losing the battle of preservation of our oceans. In relation to the warmth and the acidity caused by climate change, the loss of corals, the loss of biodiversity, overfishing, plastic pollution, other forms of toxics, pollution that make several coastal areas being totally without life. So, I mean, we are still using the battle of preservation of the oceans, and this needs to be reversed. My generation, as a matter of fact, was not able or not willing to detect when it was necessary to detect that situations were getting out of control.
Are you optimistic for the next future, for the near future, that the world leaders really understand how urgent it is to have action?
It's not a matter of optimism or pessimism. I am determined to do everything I can to make world leaders in politics, but also in the economic sector. Let's not forget that the fossil fuel industry has spent billions and billions during decades with pseudoscience and with public relations and with all kinds of lobbying to try to convince the world that climate change was not so serious and that the fossil fuels were not creating the problems that they are creating. A little bit like the tobacco industry did a few decades before. So economic leaders also have a huge responsibility, and all of them, political leaders, economic leaders, need to understand that we are in an emergency, and an emergency requires drastic measures.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much.